Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia Crasco, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hi, Beth. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have you because I think childhood trauma, everyone's got some, regardless of like how small or huge or of an impact that it makes on your current life. So my audience may not know you. So if you could tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So I am a childhood trauma consultant, which, might not be something everyone who's listening is familiar with. So I'll give you a little bit of background. I was a family therapist for children with trauma prior to having my daughter several years ago. And in that work, I was working with foster kinship and adoptive families, and I was helping them stabilize sort of crisis situations in their family because of behaviors of the child. Oftentimes, the parents were not aware of trauma, had never heard of it, didn't know what to do with it. This was, 10 years ago. And so my main role and the most success I had was teaching the adults how to understand childhood trauma, how it's impacting the children they're caring for, and also how it's impacting them. So once I was able to provide that psychoeducation is what we call it in the counseling field, I saw so much progress with the families, and we were able to stabilize the situations quickly. And although not every ending was a happy ending, there was lots of struggles and trials and tribulations that we all went through together through that process. But I had a lot of success once people understood the emotional, physical, and biological impact of trauma on children. So I took that experience, and after I had my daughter and stayed home with her for a couple of years, realized like, hey, I want to do something back in the field, but I'm not ready yet to go back into doing trauma work. Because of being a mom really changed things for me and my capacity to hold all of that
Oh my
vicarious
gosh.
trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was like, oh, I don't think I'm ready to go back into that. And I may go back to it someday, but I decided to write a children's book, which was for kinship families. And that's, if you don't familiar with that term, it's grandparents raising grandchildren or other relatives who are raising children. So it could be like an aunt raising a niece or a nephew, or it could be a cousin, a second cousin, like any type of family constellation where the child already knew the person beforehand, before they came into their care, which is different than regular foster care, because in foster care, the children are going into complete strangers' homes most of the time. So there were no books for that population. So I published one back in 2019. And after I did that, I was promoting it online, and I started speaking on podcasts about it, and I would spend like the whole hour talking about childhood trauma. And I realized I really like teaching about this to a wider audience, and there's such a need for it. And then the pandemic happened and everybody was online. So I just started getting out there more and doing free workshops and webinars to teach people about childhood trauma. And it just kind of took off on its own. And so now I offer training, trauma-informed care and trauma-informed parenting training and workshops to organizations who work with children and families. So it could be nonprofits, it could be schools, it could be nurses, doctors, lawyers, attorneys, like child welfare system. It's kind of
You cover
a
everything.
wide array of
Yeah.
groups and individuals that I work with. But yeah, I really enjoy it, and it's just opened up a whole new world for me, and I'm glad that I sort of diverted from what I was doing into this, because I think it's just the perfect match for me.
Yeah. And I love that you say that maybe at some point you'll go back to that, but right now, like you don't have the capacity for it, especially like as a mom, because I can imagine how heavy that is. Like when you're submersed in it and you're immersed in it and you're just, and then you have to come home and parent your own child, right? After seeing all of the things in the foster care system and then coming back and like you just want to squeeze your own child and be like, I will love you forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was difficult, even without being a parent. And Um, and so I knew that having a child, especially a young child, it just was going to be too much for me. So I was glad that I had that awareness to
Mhm.
know that I needed to shift a little bit and still do the work that I love, but do it in a different way and make purpose and meaning out of it, for a wider audience. And that's the thing. So much of what I know, everybody needs to know. Like so much of what I learned in my counseling, um, practice and in my education to become a counselor is so vital for all of our families right now. And I'm like, I can't just leave this all locked up in my brain. I got to get it out there.
Yeah. All right, well,
So,
let's start there. What is
yeah.
like what is like the first thing that comes to mind when I say to you, so much of what you know needs to get out there? Like what is like bursting at the seams to come out?
Well, if I had a goal in mind, two of my biggest goals and lofty goals, one is for people to understand on a much bigger level that allowing a child to express their emotions is absolutely okay. And I
Mhm.
know that can sound really simple, but I still see it all the time where adults are shutting down their children's emotions and maybe their tears, and they shame them out of it, or they tell them to stop crying, or they try to distract them out of it. And so, one of my big messages to families and parents is really just the simple fact that it's okay to let children cry at times. And in fact, it's beneficial for them and it helps them sort of release the tension from their bodies. And, they need to know that it's okay to feel their feelings. And that is getting out there more in the general population, but there's still a lot of non-believers that I
Yeah,
want to reach.
I that's how I was raised. And
Yeah.
like crying is absolutely not acceptable. Like that's a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
And getting to the point now of where like my daughter cries and I let her cry, I'm there with her. I hold her like it's okay, like to
Yeah.
cry. It's okay to let these emotions out because yeah, your body needs that release of emotions. But what do you think people are scared of when it comes to letting their kids cry?
Yeah. So I don't think it's bad intentions, when people are like, "Oh, you're okay, shake it off, you'll be fine," and they try to like
Make their kid
tamp
resilient?
somebody's emotions. I think it brings out a very visceral reaction in us for a couple of reasons when we see a child in distress. And it's not because of bad intentions or being a bad parent or any of that. I'm not trying to shame parents, but I think it's bringing up deeper things in us that we just don't acknowledge. And this is building on my next goal, which is to help parents become aware of their own childhood trauma and how it's impacted them. So it's uncomfortable, right, to see a child in distress or crying or angry. And our natural instinct is to want to stop that because it brings up feelings in us. And it's typically hitting on a nerve, maybe where someone, when you were little, couldn't tolerate hearing you cry or couldn't tolerate your anger, sadness, fear, and they tamped it out. So now when you see it in your own child, it's like now you sort of have this gut reaction that now you need to stop it, because it's just generational. It gets kind of passed down into your DNA, that this is the reaction to have. And I wasn't allowed to have these feelings. So my child can't have these feelings either, because if they do, it's going to bring up all this stuff in me.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think there's that. I also think there's the social pressure of like, oh, well, if your kid doesn't complain or whine or cry, we have to have happy children all the
Right.
time, or else we're
Happy
bad parents.
adults too.
Right, right. There's like no room for grumpy kids. There's no room for tantrums. It's just not, it's seen as a failure on especially mothers, if a child is having a hard time with their emotions. It's like, oh, well, what did mom do wrong? Or how bad of a parent is mom? And so moms that tend to get the brunt of that. And I think our social pressure around the fear of being inadequate or being not a good mom is there's just so much pressure on us to want to be a good, we want to be good moms. We want to do the right thing for our kids. And so if there's any display that maybe things aren't going well, we also want to like stop that as quickly as possible. Um,
Wait,
and I
before you move
also,
on, wait, hold on. I want
yeah,
to go back and talk to two things before we get too far away from it.
yeah,
So something you talked about when kids like tantrums or having a bad day. It's funny because as adults, like we're allowed to have bad days, right? And we
mm,
can be upset and be frustrated or whatever, and you can talk to your partner about it, or you blow a gasket or whatever the case may be. Now, mind you, if this kid that's navigating the world for the very first time as well, who doesn't have the tools that you've got as an adult, has a bad day, for whatever reason, as adults, like we don't have time for that, right?
Mm.
And it's like, wait, we need to make time for that because, and to kind of piggyback on the other part I wanted to touch on, you need to make time for that because they'll grow up and then you perpetuate the cycle that you're currently in, right? Like I had to unlearn that behavior as well. But then also like making space for your own child or stepchildren or foster kids or what kind of children you have in your home, it requires you to heal like your inner child, which was such an undertaking that, I mean, there are times now, like if my daughter is struggling, at first it was really hard for me to sit with her because, you know, like I had said, like I wasn't allowed to have feelings like that. And so it was really uncomfortable because we can talk about being happy or being excited or being delighted or joy or, you know, all of the happy so-called emotions. But then when you talk about fear or anger or frustration or negative perceived emotions by society, people get weird about that. And I was just
Yeah.
talking on a podcast about this yesterday, how, and you can absolutely disagree with me too, like that's fine. Um, I don't view emotions as positive or negative. They're just emotions. And I
Right.
think that's the like crazy label that we've put on. And like you said, moms get the brunt of it. Like if your kid is acting out or if your stepkid is acting out, well, what did you do to make them do that? Or why aren't you fixing it? And it's not even necessarily like fixing it. Like they've got to work through those emotions. But it's okay to have all of the ranges.
Yeah.
And I think that it's hard for our like super fast paced society of like let's go, we've got to get out the door because we got to get to school at this time and we've got to do this and we've got to do that, and I don't really have time for you to act out, but just,
Mhm.
and I've said this before, but I would rather show up to a birthday party at your house 10, 20, 30 minutes late and everyone is intact and like put
Mhm.
together and happy, if you will, than to
Yeah.
show up on time and I'm frazzled and I'm distracted and I'm frustrated. And my daughter is like a bundle of nerves and bawling because whatever happened, it took her 10 minutes to tie your shoes as opposed to the 30 seconds that I wanted it to. Like, I'd rather just make the time and do things now because I feel like you don't really realize, like this is the one thing that I love about being a stepmom is I get a chance to do childhood again, like with my daughter. But when you're parenting your own kid, like I don't get a chance to do her childhood again. But we've already launched two kids into the adult world. And then now, like, okay, I can take the lessons that I've learned from there. It's not a big deal if we're 20 minutes late. It's not a big deal if we're 30 minutes late. I want you to show up in a good mood. You don't have to be happy. You don't even have to be like in a great mood, but like just the world is not on fire.
Right. Yes. I think we feel so much of that time pressure,
Mhm.
especially as parents. Again, like what will it look like if we're late and what will people think? And we have to be there, we have to be on time. There's like this, you get this badge of honor, for being on
I'm so
time.
busy. Yeah. Yeah. Look at all the things that we're doing.
Yeah, so I think you're dead on with that. I am the same way, although my husband isn't at times. I have to remind him, like, listen, we're not on our way to the emergency room. It's
Exactly.
okay. We're just going to a birthday party, or we're just going over to, my friend's house for dinner. Like, we don't have to be there at exactly 5:30 p.m. Like, we can wiggle around if we have to. And I try to give her that time. And even some people feel that extreme rushing for children is very what would you say, unhealthy for their nervous system. Like
Yeah.
to constantly be like, we gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go, we have to be there, we're gonna be late. Like that's so much pressure on especially young children who don't understand time. They have no concept of time, or like, oh, we have to be there, we'll miss something. What do you mean we're gonna miss something? Like to them, there's all the time in the world. And
Yeah.
as we get older, our sense of time shrinks, but
Mhm.
theirs is infinite compared to ours. So
Right.
they're like, they have no concept most of the time, children, especially children under 5, of how long something will take, of what it means to be late. That doesn't even register. And especially like having to get something done by a certain time, like they just don't, it's just not computing up there most of the time. Um, so I think that's a big issue that we tend to overlook. And I also wanted to say something about,
Childhood trauma.
yeah, but just like how again, like that's, that can all be tied to the back to the way we were raised too. So
Mhm.
like everything we do as parents is bringing us back to our own childhood. We're basically like reliving our childhood through our children in a way because their age and the way they look and the way they sound, those are going to be reminders of ourselves when we were little and what we did and did not get that we needed or didn't need. So, when we hit upon our child having a need that wasn't met for us when we were little people, that's where you will tend to find your own big emotions overflowing. And if you can recognize that and realize that, okay, this is a me issue. This is something I'm struggling with from my own childhood. It's not my child's just being a kid. Like they're just doing kid things that all children do. I'm having this big reaction because it's a need that wasn't met for me as a child. And you might not even remember that need not being met. But anywhere that you see a big emotion coming out of you when it has to do with parenting or step parenting, is likely tied to your past.
Which I think is wild because, yeah, like I said earlier, like it was really hard for me to sit with my daughter and her have these big emotions because I wasn't allowed to. It's gotten easier. And now there are times where I'm like holding her and she, is upset. Or, I mean, it could even be like in a good situation, like I'm snuggling her at night to bed and I'm like, oh my gosh, I would have loved for this. Or I would have loved to have somebody just be like, hey, you know what? Sometimes life is hard. Sometimes life sucks. Sometimes life is really great. And just acknowledging and validating wherever you are on the spectrum, good or bad. And so I definitely, and I don't ever want her to feel like love is conditional because I definitely felt that too. So I don't ever want her to think, you know what? I'm doing a great job building this puzzle or putting it together or playing with my blocks. So my mom loves this. I'm like, wow, like that's great. I see that you've been working really hard on it, doing whatever it is. But then also, if she's struggling, I still am like, I love you. This is hard. We'll get through it together. But I don't ever want her to feel like I'm just getting love because I'm performing, or it's because I'm doing good things, or I'm doing things that make my mom happy. And we have those conversations about emotions, whether it's happy, sad, frustrated, whatever. But, I always tell her happiness is an inside job. It is not your job to make me happy. It's my job to make me happy. It's your job to make you happy. Safety is a different situation. Like it's my job to help keep you safe. It's not solely my job to keep you safe, but I'm going to help keep you safe. But it's your job to work on keeping your own self safe, right? Because I don't want her to think like I'll just do whatever I want and like jump off the top of this building. Like, well, no, I need you to like cognitively think about this. Like, is this, I'll ask her like, do you think that's safe? Right. Because again, like with the time, they're not thinking about that. And
Right.
yeah, I think that, gentle parenting or respectful parenting or conscious parenting, whatever you want to call it, has become a lot more mainstream since I learned about it like 7 years
Yeah.
ago, 6 years
Yeah.
ago, and more people do it. And it makes my heart happy. I'm like, oh, it's great because then you don't have these adults that are walking around, pretending to be something that they're not, pretending to be happy when they're bubbling or simmering like below the surface. But then
Yeah.
also it requires you to go back and do that work yourself and like heal your inner child so you can show up and hold space for any kid, whether it's your kid, your step kid, a foster kid, whatever the case may be. And if you could touch a little bit on like the adults childhood trauma and like how that shows up for your own parenting. I know you did a little bit as far as like
Yeah.
your own parenting shows up that way.
Yeah. Well, first, we have so much in common. Like we sound like we parent very similarly. One of the things I do, a little tip or tactic thing that has worked for our family and that might not work for everybody, but um, around building, uh, what would you say, acceptance around mistakes or like trying things and getting it wrong. We started doing high fives for every time she tried something and got it wrong. And
Okay,
she
yeah.
loves that. I'm like, wait, did you try? And she's like, she'll be like, yeah, and I'm like, and you got it wrong, and she'll be like, yeah. I'm like, high five, you tried something, you got it wrong. Like, it's okay to, get it wrong sometimes.
I should
And
try that with her.
she loves that. Like, she thinks it's so funny. And it
I'm
shows her
learning.
that,
That's what we are.
yeah, it
I'm
shows
still
that it's
learning.
okay to make mistakes and fall down and try again. That you don't only get rewarded for getting it right all the time. I
Mhm.
think is really important. But back to your question. So, well, first you have to understand and see your own stuff, right? If you're not aware of your own childhood trauma or your own pain, it doesn't have to, if the word trauma doesn't resonate with you, maybe it's just like childhood pain or childhood wounds or um, you know, just some healing of your inner child that needs to be done. That's okay. Some people feel as though it was traumatic. Other people could have the same exact experience and not feel that it was traumatic, but that it was still bothersome and uncomfortable for them. So I encourage you not to get stuck on the word, trauma, as much as we can just talk about needs that weren't met in childhood, because that can be traumatizing for some people, and for others, for whatever reason, because they have support networks, because they have innate resiliency, or they have some sort of um, different body chemistry, whatever it might be, they don't feel traumatized by those things. But what we can do, like I said, is pay attention to the issues that are bringing up any big emotions in ourselves. And if you think about underneath all of that, try to think back to the first time you felt that way. So you might be really frustrated because let's say clumsiness really bothers you, like your daughter, like, or son, or whoever, dropping things, breaking things, falling down and getting hurt, and like every time they do that you just erupt. You're like, oh my God, what are you doing? You know you fell down again, you broke something again, and you just, like, it really activates you. And even though you knew it was a mistake, like, you just can't control your emotions. Well, you would want to ask yourself, like, when was the last time I felt that way? Like, when did I ever feel like um maybe I did something I wasn't supposed to do by mistake, and what kind of reactions did I get from the people around me? And it kind of can be a little investigation as to what might be underneath your anger and frustration. And once you uncover that connection, it like it's almost like cutting the wire on the bomb. It's
Yeah.
like, it's like you found the thing, and then the next time you'll notice that, like, your brain will be like, oh, okay, this is my stuff, not her stuff. And it just, that little recognition of connecting it back to your past will help you diffuse your reaction. So that's, one thing that you can do. Also, like, maybe it's not that someone treated you that way, but maybe a time you felt really, um, maybe it's like somebody broke something or was clumsy with something in your past that was really hurtful to you. So maybe it's not a need that wasn't met, but maybe it's like, oh, well, the first time I really felt upset when something got broken, or when somebody else got hurt, or whatever it is. When was that? Oh, when I was little, my brother broke my favorite porcelain doll, and it's like,
Mhm.
it was, so you kind of have to do some investigating and get creative. But once you draw that line, it really can diffuse the anger that you're feeling, or frustration. So,
I like the getting curious about it and going back. That's what I coach stepmoms through too, like when they're triggered by whatever's going on in their step family life, whether it's the communication with the ex, or the kids are acting like kids, or they're saying or doing hurtful things, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, when you could go back and say, okay, why is this bothering me? Why is this bringing up whatever it is that it's bringing up? Because rather than treating this symptom, then you can actually get to the root of the problem and work on it's. I view it as like pulling weeds. Like if you're just pulling the leaf off, like the root, well, the root is
yeah.
still there, yeah, right? Like I garden
Oh,
and stuff.
it's such a great analogy. I love
Yeah.
that.
So I'm like one of those nerdy people that has like the dandelion tool that like can go down like in the ground and like pop the root out, because
Yeah, me
it's gonna keep
too.
coming back. Like it's still there. So if you can go in and figure out like why is this actually happening? Because you can superficially heal yourself, right? Like put a band-aid on it. It's fine. Well, that band-aid is gonna fall off and it's still there's still going to be a wound there. There's still going to be something going on. And yeah, but like, that's the hard work though, right? Like if you have to go and
Yes.
sit there and
Right. And
take
bring
the
up your
time.
old stuff. And I always recommend, if you're really having trouble with your anger, temper around things, or like any big emotions that are coming up, not just anger. Anger's my thing, so that's why
It was
that's how
totally my
I
thing
tend
too.
to
Yeah.
that's how I tend to react. This whole idea that women don't get angry is BS.
I will show you.
That's why I keep referring to it, because that's what it brings. Like, it's a sense of helplessness that turns into anger for me.
Mhm.
And so crying did it. Um,
Um,
Whining now does it, because now she doesn't cry as often, but it's the whining and
we actually
complaining.
got a sign. It's above our like basement entrance that says there's a $5 charge for whining. We got it for, like my stepson when he was younger because he would whine too, and it would drive me crazy. And so like I have never shared this story, but that's why we got it. I saw it one time when I was out. I don't even know wherever I was, and I bought it. And I remember like the looks that I got about it, obviously, because it's not my kid, right? So now it's not funny because it's not my kid and it's not like I can tease. And granted, it wasn't like things weren't super awesome like in our step family at that time. But I remember having my husband hang it and he was just the dread of like hanging it. And so where my stepson sat at the table, he could see it. Where I sat at our table, I couldn't. At that time I could see it, but I've since switched seats, which is a whole different story. But I would just like point at it because and he would be like, and he would roll his eyes. But now we joke about it and now we laugh about it, but it's still there. Like 10 years later, it's still there. And
Yeah.
my daughter is not at that point where she whines, but I'm gonna start pointing that out to her, like when that starts to happen. Because yeah, I can't stand the whining either. Like you either are gonna do it or you're not gonna do it. And if you feel helpless, like let me know, we'll work on it together, but we're not gonna whine about it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I might have to disagree with you a little bit there, and that
Sure.
it's similar to crying, right? Where it's just a different expression. It's kind of like this tension or this frustration that they are letting out. And so I do think that it is
That's a valid
normal
point.
for kids to whine, and it's a way for them to express themselves, but we can help them like find better ways to cope or find better ways to solve their problems by talking it through. But I think there's an age range where it really just whining is just their thing, so if we try to take that from them, and it's just the same as trying to take the crying away from them too.
It's a good
uh,
point. Yeah.
so just some thoughts. But I think that's it is like it sets us off, right? It's like, no, you have to stop doing that thing. It's just not okay with me. And it's probably because it's bringing up a lot of feelings. So the the whole idea that like gentle parenting is easy parenting is not
It's like the
accurate.
biggest myth ever.
The hardest, most difficult way to parent. Be so much easier to just, pretend they didn't have needs and just punish them all the time for every single thing and scare them into compliance. That would be easier.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be healthy, but it would be easier for them, for us, I mean. But taking the time to empathize and validate a little one's feelings, it may feel like it's not making any headway when they're young, but when they're older, it's going to pay off in their way of handling the world. So to me, we're kind of interrupting the way we're parenting now, and the way a lot of parent people are parenting now is going to break that cycle of trauma that gets passed down to family after family after family. And if you're a step parent, it can be even more difficult because there's so many elements at play and people's feelings and emotions. I mean, I can't even imagine. I grew up as in a divorced family, and my parents both had other partners. One had a child, but the other did not. So like so my dad never had more children. So we were the only two. So we didn't have that conflict. But there's other things. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in families with a history of divorce. And so those emotions are even more heightened at times. So I encourage parents, stepmoms, and everyone who's listening to just have some grace and know that it's okay to mess up at this too. Like our children, it's okay for our children to see us mess up, make mistakes, because it teaches them that it's okay for them to make mistakes, but also we can model for them by, I'm big on apologies. Like my dad would always apologize to me if he lost his temper when I was young. And that really left a lasting effect on me. And while it doesn't take away, his temper and the things that affected me when I was young, knowing that he had remorse and knowing that he had the courage and the respect for me to at least come back and say, I'm really sorry. I know that I didn't handle that well. That modeled it for me to learn how to apologize to people in the future.
I
So
think that's huge because sometimes people view children as less than. Well, they're not adults yet. Just
yeah.
because they're not adults doesn't mean they don't deserve the same respect. Having said that, it is really funny when I do gentle parenting, probably like 95% of the time, but that 5% of the time, like I'm still human, right? And so like I've like been
Yeah.
like, just stop talking to me for 5 seconds. And my daughter's like, you're not supposed to talk to me like that because I don't like it. And I'm like, you're right. You know what? I'm sorry. You're right. I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have said it in that tone, or I'm really sorry. I'm feeling frustrated because I've, asked you for like 10 minutes of silence. Like, we're going to do independent play now. I've set a timer and you've interrupted me doing whatever it is that I'm working on 5 times. So I'm feeling frustrated. And then
Yeah.
when the roles are reversed and I've done that to her and she talks to me like that, I'm like, hey, do you remember when I did this? And now you're doing it, right? I don't like that. And, she's very quick to be like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said, but it is interesting because, we've been with family or we've been in public, and it is interesting the looks that you get when you apologize to a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
people are like, why are you apologizing to your kid? Because I made a
Yeah.
mistake.
Yeah.
I'm human. Like, I make a mistake. And, I say that to her too. Like, I'm not perfect. There
Yep.
was the Let It Go song in Frozen, when she's talking about like conceal, don't feel, all of those things. We've had big conversations about that. And, the Moana thing, like trying to be the perfect daughter. And I'm like, I'm just going to tell you now, you are perfect because you're imperfect. There is no such thing as a perfect person ever. And she's like, well, I am. And I'm like, wait, okay, that's my, like, no, you're not, right? Like, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone is still learning. Well, you're a perfect mom. And I'm like, well, thanks. You see these cracks?
Yeah,
You see the
right.
light coming through? But no, I'm like, there's not a perfect person everywhere, anywhere, right? Like, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone is still learning. And we view mistakes as lessons in our house. So it's not that they're bad. We're still learning as we go. Everyone is learning. Everyone is learning. Everyone is learning. And she's like, oh, well, I'm still learning too. I'm like, right. So if you get something wrong, that's totally cool. Like, good for you. But I'm going to steal your high five thing. I like that. I think that's a really good idea. Like, that reward for like getting something wrong. Like, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's especially if it's because she tried something. I think
Yeah.
that's because what you're doing is you're reinforcing the fact that she tried.
Yeah.
And that's, we're so afraid of failure in our culture. But if you're not failing at something, you're not doing anything. Like
You're
we
not
can't,
learning. Yeah.
no, like people who don't ever fail also don't do very much.
Right.
They're not,
Yeah.
they're not getting much done. They're not trying new things. They're not, they're too afraid. They get stuck in their perfectionism. And so I think it's important to encourage that in this generation. That's, making mistakes is just part of life. And I agree that apologizing can get you some funny looks. In fact, at first my husband was like not on board with that idea. And because it I think what it makes some people think, and I could be wrong, can't speak for everyone, but I kind of think that people are like, well, you're giving away your power.
100%.
Like
Yep.
you need to show them that you're a
You're in
strong
charge.
person, you're in charge. And if you don't, they're gonna just run all over you and just
Yep.
run amok, right? And it's like
Right.
that's actually not true. People have
Oh,
all these misconceived ideas about how children will respond. It's the same way they don't want to validate emotions, I think, because if they're like, I'm always saying to people like turn into their feelings. Like
yeah.
say it's okay. I bet that was really hard. And this could be very scary for you, validate those feelings because that's going to help them calm down. People have the misconceived notion that children, if they get their feelings validated, are going to ramp up. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, if I say that this is really scary, they're going to get more scared. And it's like, no, they're actually going to get less scared because now they're going to feel validated and like someone understands them and it's okay to have these feelings. So yeah, I think that there's just so many parenting myths that we've been taught from our own parents that get passed down generation to generation. But we have that power now to do better, to know better, do better, and to break that cycle. And that's what my whole life is about. My whole purpose here is to break the cycle in my own family of things that didn't go well. And there are also things that did go really well, but to break the cycle of the things that didn't work well and to help other families and people do the same so we can prevent childhood trauma, not just work on healing it, but so that we can get to a place where we're proactive in preventing it.
Yeah. And I 100% hear you on when you tell a child like that is really scary, or you validate their emotions and people think that it's going to ramp up. Well,
Yeah.
like what I say to them is, well, when you tell somebody like an adult to calm down when they're annoyed about something or they're really pissed off, they're like, does that work? No, it like escalates it, right? They like flip out. I'm like, so like the
Yeah.
exact same thing happens for a kid. Or if you're like, hey, you know what? I see that you're really upset, Beth. Like that really sucked. Like, let's talk about it. Then you're like, okay, I can take a deep breath and we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, weird how that
Yeah.
works, right? Well,
Yeah.
let's do this to totally kind of switch gears here. When you like, wait, before that, like what made you decide to take this route as far as parenting went?
It was my experience as a therapist.
Okay.
So becoming a therapist and working with children and families who were going through extreme amounts of trauma, the loss of their biological family, the abuse, neglect that they may have endured. Some of them were grieving, the actual death of their parents. Um, Working closely with those families and learning how to help them from a trauma-informed care perspective is what inspired me to do this type of parenting with my child, because even though she doesn't have trauma, um, or doesn't have similar, distressing early adversity like
Mhm.
my clients had, trauma-informed parenting is really just conscious parenting, or responsive parenting is just a different word for it. It's all the same stuff. It's all the best practices and what we need to help grow and develop, mentally, emotionally stable human beings. And it's just, to me, mental health is the foundation of everything else. If you don't have your mental health, if you don't have coping skills, if you don't understand yourself and you don't have self-awareness, you're not going to be very successful in the world. And if you have a ton of unaddressed trauma and we're putting people out into the world without any support for that, or any, what would you say, any like compassion for that, then we just have a society that will break down eventually. Like, to me, this is like a societal issue. Like, we have to intervene now because there's so many children experiencing abuse and neglect, and loss without getting help, that if we don't raise our children with this mentality, you know, how are we all gonna, continue on? Like, I really think of it that way. Like, it's really the foundation for so much of our world's progress and success. So yeah, I'm just really passionate about it.
Yeah,
But
I love
I also see it work, I saw it work even before I had children. I saw it
it.
work.
Let
So
me
that's,
ask you this, like this is my follow-up question to that. So
yeah.
since you have changed your parenting style, it doesn't mirror what you had growing up. Have
Mhm.
you heard anything like from your parents or like siblings, like, oh, why are you parenting like that? Or do you get any judgment based on that?
Um,
Or like,
I'm sure there's been a lot of, probably thoughts and feelings that haven't been shared with me.
hmm,
I get that feeling, and not just from my parents, but just like extended family and things. I'm sure there's been some moments. But they do a good job of trying to not, what would you say? I think I have an advantage, honestly, because I was a psychotherapist and worked with children and families. So I think that actually gives me an advantage where they don't want to question. They know, like, I'm not
You know what
questioning
you're doing.
because she knows more than I do in this area. So I think for me, I get that advantage. It's so whether they have those feelings or not, they're pretty good about keeping their opinions to themselves, which thankfully is another thing that our generation has helped with
Yeah.
the grandparents understanding like I'm not the parent. I have to let them do the parenting. I think in previous generations, the grandparents would be like, do it this way and do it that way, and you're doing it wrong, and have been. I know they're still out there, but we're shifting things, I
Yeah.
think. Grandparents are even becoming more aware, like, all right, I gotta step back and let her do her thing. It's not gonna help for me to intervene with my opinions right now. And so I think I've been lucky to have understanding relatives and stuff. But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure I'm sure I'm messing up.
Right. Yeah, there's going to be some level of something that's gonna happen, right? Like everyone's gonna have like something's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Um, let me ask you this. Because at the beginning you talked about stabilizing behavior as far as like foster kids went. I see your eyes light up. So in a blended family, obviously in a step family, there's been a divorce. So it's a trauma, right? Like even for the adults, which people are like, that's not a traumatic event. I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yes.
Um, when you've got can you talk a little bit about like how to help the kids stabilize their behavior when they've gone through a traumatic experience such as a divorce? Because now you've got these step parents that are coming in that aren't their biological parents. They don't know these people. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really delicate situation, and our children are always looking to us to determine how they should respond. So whether our words don't matter as much as our behaviors. So
Mhm.
if we are coming to them calmly and explaining things, I think being very open and being very like respectful of each other is important. So even when you have to tell the child, like, hey, mommy and daddy are deciding to separate and we may get divorced, having that conversation together, as if possible, if you guys are able to have an amicable relationship and have that conversation with the children together and be very clear that it's not their fault. It's not because of anything they've done, because children will tend to blame themselves for the breakdown of the relationship. And just saying like we know what's best for ourselves, and we know that we will be your best parents in separate homes.
Mhm.
We want to be the best parents we can for you, and we know that we will do that, more effectively as in separate homes, and that we
Yeah.
still love you. And this isn't about anything you've done. There's nothing you could have done to prevent it. There's nothing you could have done to cause it. Um, it's just the decision that we are making that we think is best for our family right now. You'll still be in mom's life. You'll still be in dad's life. We still, if that's, if all that is possible in a perfect world, right? So I think being really open about it and making sure that blame isn't passed, and then moving from there, it's trying to maintain, if you can, some sort of peace between you and your ex-spouse. Because, for example, children will internalize the things they hear about their parents. So if you are hearing your mom being called all sorts of names and discussing things and blah, 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 you don't think, oh, my mom's a terrible person. You think, oh, well, if that's the way she is, then I must be that way too. And same thing if you're hearing bad things about your dad. Like if you're hearing, oh, he's a loser, he's no good, whatever, negative things,
Mhm.
the child internalizes that to mean, oh, well, I came from him, so
Right.
I must be those things too. It's
Mhm.
just what they do. They just think that way because they don't understand any well, I don't want to say they don't understand. It's just where they are developmentally.
Yep.
They they are very attached and identify themselves with their parents. And so anything they do is a reflection into who they are. They're trying to discover their identity. And when they hear negative things, they think, oh, well, okay, then that must be what I'm supposed to do too. Dad's a bad guy. Well, I'll be a bad kid then. That's what we do in my family. Like I want to be like daddy, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So, so that's why I think it gets it gets tricky. I mean, I know people's feelings get really hurt and tense, and if you have one parent who's really bashing the other and the other one's trying to stay strong and not do it, it can get very, very difficult and tricky. But what's best for the children is always to at least remain neutral. Like if you can't say anything positive about them, at least try to stay neutral
Mhm.
and maybe find, and if you can, finding something good in the other parent. So maybe dad has a really good sense of humor, even though, maybe there's a lot of other things you don't like about him, but maybe he has a really good sense of humor. So the next time your son or daughter makes a joke or says something funny, you could say, oh, you're so funny. Your dad has such a great sense of humor. You probably got that from him. Or, like kind of trying to point out the good things about the spouse and sharing that they pass down some good things to them. And I know that can be hard to do when you're angry at that person, but it is good for the child. And in these such situations, we need to put our own sort of emotions on the back burner. I hate to say it, but that's why good therapy is important.
Oh my gosh,
And
yeah.
and really do what's best for the children because they didn't ask to be in this situation, and nobody does, right? Nobody's asking to go through all that trauma and loss. But yeah, we want to try and do the least amount of damage as we can. But on the other side, I try to be, I think it's important that you're also honest with children. So, if dad or mom is unsafe to be with, then, you can't sugarcoat that and say, oh, and make excuses for them because they see through it. They can see right through our,
That's the best thing about kids, though. Like they don't have
yeah.
any filter, so they're just like,
um,
a spade is a spade, and you're like, you're not supposed to say
yeah,
that.
yeah, they know. I mean, they know way more than we give them credit for, and even if they're not saying it, they feel it in their bodies. They link up with us, and they can feel in their bodies what we're feeling. Um, we have something called, this is getting probably way too technical, but mirror neurons in parents and children. So our brain literally can mirror the neurons can mirror the neurons of our caregivers. So they are picking up on way more than we give them credit for. And so being honest as much as you can in age appropriate terms is also important because if you're telling lies or fibs or cover ups, they're going to find out eventually. And then they're not going to trust you either. And you're just going to be another person who broke their trust. And um, broken trust is the root of all trauma. So like that's that's the damage that's done when trauma happens is that you can't trust those people who you're supposed to be able to trust. So just some thoughts and tips around that, but acknowledging also that it's super difficult and challenging and heartbreaking at times to be part of a blended family. But on the flip side, there's also, a reason why it needed to happen.
I
As
like
an
that you
adult,
say age appropriate though, because you can be honest about what's happening, like, but you don't have to tell them everything, right? If you've got a
right?
5-year-old, you don't need to tell them that their mom's an alcoholic or their dad's on drugs or they're not showing up because they don't care about you or whatever. Because yeah, like you said, like you've got to keep like your own emotions out of it. You can be honest with them without giving them all of the details that
True.
you don't need to have, or if their other parent has a revolving door of whatever, you don't need to be like, oh well, that's the fifth boyfriend she's had this week and that person takes precedence over you or whatever the case may be. Like keep it age appropriate. And yeah, the kids see a lot more than you think that they do. They also understand a lot more. So, when you are giving that, oh, like you've got a really great sense of humor, like your dad, or I always caution people to practice what they're going to say because if I'm like, oh, you've got a great sense of humor like your dad, well, that didn't come out nice, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, and you can see my face obviously, but like kids see that like that wasn't
Yes,
genuine, so
genuine. Right,
you've got
right.
to say something
Agreed.
that's 100%
Right.
because they're just like, yeah, whatever, like you're not pulling the wool over my eyes with this.
Yes, totally, totally, totally. Yeah, you have to feel it. It has to be authentic. I don't encourage people to fake things. That's why I said if possible,
Mhm.
it'd be great if that, I mean, that would be amazing if you could get to a place where you authentically felt like you could talk about something positive about your ex without, you know, wanting to
Yeah.
throw it out a little bit.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And
Um,
if you're not there yet, it's okay too. Like
and
I've
it's okay. Yeah.
there's so
You can be
many,
neutral.
yeah,
You can just choose to not talk about it, and choose to stay neutral when possible. But I think the age appropriate thing, just to give some guidance there, because people might be like, well, what's age appropriate for a 5-year-old? So I always say that if they're old enough to ask the question, then they're old enough to hear the answer. So
okay.
that's a good rule of thumb. But also with young children, so like, up to 6 or 7 years old, it's either simply mom or dad are unable to keep you safe right now, and that's why it's our job to keep you safe. And right now, mom or dad is not making choices that are safe for you. So you're going to be here or there or whatever. That's just an example. If
Yeah.
safety is an issue, if it's mom and dad are not making great choices, they're not making healthy choices right now. So, you have to be around adults who are making healthy choices. So and so is not making healthy choices, that kind of thing. Um, uh, Same thing, like if mom doesn't show up for her visit or dad doesn't show up for a visit because their boyfriend or girlfriend's more important right now, again, that's a choice. Mom and
Mhm.
dad are not making the best choices right now in their life.
Yeah.
And
You
so,
can tell them without like going into all of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. But then as children get older, they need more details, right? So you're going to tell a middle schooler a little bit more, you should already be having discussions about drugs and alcohol
Mhm.
starting at like 10 and up, maybe even younger,
Isn't that
unfortunately.
crazy? Yeah.
Yes, insane. So, you can tell them more about the truth about substance use or, um, you know, legal issue, violence, crime, things that they're going to understand already from things that they've seen on TV or friends or stories they've heard. And so the older they get, the more information they can have.
Mhm.
Um,
I
and
love that because I think that, yeah, we get caught up in like what can we say, what can we not say? So if somebody is struggling with that, that's listening to us right now, where can they find you?
Sure. So I am on all over social media, but the easiest way to find me is to go to bethtyson.com. And at the top of my page, there'll be social links to
Okay.
Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. I do have a private Facebook group that you have to have, you have to give all the answers in order to be accepted into, and your answers have to be
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
Not
Normal. I like that. Normal.
I really closely monitor that group to make sure that it's safe and that people are not being um, unkind to each other. And so I've been really successful. I haven't, knock on wood, but I haven't had any trolls like really giving me a hard time or giving my members a hard time in there because the criteria to get in is pretty strict.
What is the
So
group about?
so it's called Minds, and it is like an online educational space for people to learn about trauma-informed parenting or conscious parenting. I have a lot of professionals in there, a lot of mental health experts who want to know more about childhood trauma, a lot of caregivers, kinship caregivers, foster parents, step parents, kind of just anyone who wants to learn more about childhood trauma and have a place to go where they can ask questions and get feedback from other experts. I would say like half my group is mental health professionals and the other half is like parents. So it's kind of the perfect mix of we're all learning from each other. So I encourage you to check that out. And again, it's called Minds, and I'm sure we'll put a link in the show notes. But bethtyson.com is where you can find me. And I don't work one-on-one with families anymore, but I do provide training and education to organizations, and I consult with people on trauma-informed projects. So like if you have some sort of business project or something you're working on and you are concerned that it might not be trauma-informed or might not be like developmentally appropriate for children or things like that, I help sort of be the what would you say? I help give perspective on that and help guide people through their projects. So
That is
yeah.
so cool. Yeah, I'm like, I want to check out your Facebook group.
Yeah, I love it. It's so fun. It's a nice place. I do Q&A Monday
Okay.
where I have everybody, anyone who wants can ask a question about trauma-informed care, and then we all answer it. Like the group just goes and starts answering, everybody's questions. So that's new. I just started it 2 weeks ago, so I expect it to grow. But you should see it there if you go look at it today. You'll see it from yesterday.
Oh, that's really cool, especially since you've got the blend of like mental health experts and then like family or like parents.
Yeah.
Really cool idea. I like that. Oh, yeah, I'll definitely link it in the show notes. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you spilling all the beans on everything. Like, oh, yeah, I feel like I can talk to you about this. I'm super fascinated by it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I really loved our conversation. I hope we can stay in touch because we're like kindred spirits, I can
Yeah,
tell.
right. Yeah, I'm like, I will definitely keep you on my list of like, you need to come back and talk again. But yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so much, Beth.
no problem. Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this week's episode. If anything was helpful or resonated with you, please share it on social media and tag me. I'm just at Alicia Crasco. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and a review while you're at it, that would also be really helpful. And if you find yourself struggling with your stepmom journey and you want a little bit more support without the hefty price tag of coaching, you might want to check out the Stepmom Side community, which is my own private community for stepmoms, where you get to connect with other stepmoms around the world and myself, where I hold weekly office hours and monthly group coaching. It's kind of like you have your own personal coach in your own back pocket. Again, without that hefty price tag. See you next week.